So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Dr. Virginia Spielmann. I am British, in case you hadn't already figured that out, occupational therapist. Moved over here. This is my 6th year in Colorado, where I am the executive director of STAR Institute for Sensory Processing. STAR is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we can do events like this because of the support of our community. So we're going to tell you more about that later. I did my bachelor's in occupational therapy at Oxford Brookes, and my master's over here, and my PhD is in infant and early childhood development with an emphasis on mental health. And yeah, I'm really delighted to be here today with Dr. Mel Houser.
Hi, thank you so much. So I am an autistic family physician, and I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization called All Brains Belong Vermont. We try to make life better for neurodivergent people of all ages through neurodiversity affirming medical care, in addition to neuro-inclusive social connection opportunities and educational trainings. And I'll also mention that I am the parent of an autistic 6-year-old, and I am late identified autistic, dyspraxic, dyslexic, dyscalculic, ADHD. In addition to being autistic, I learned all of these things about myself at age 37. So a lot of what we'll be talking about today relating to destigmatizing sensory processing differences, I am personally experiencing the journey so common to many people who began the journey of coming to understand their nervous systems as adults.
Amazing. And your practice is really cool. You know, I think you undersold it a bit there, because you're providing neurodiversity affirming care, but you're doing that by unlearning traditional medical practice and delivery of healthcare services, and really trying to operate in ways that are probably good for all humans, in my opinion, but really focusing on that community piece, giving people a place to belong and become. It's pretty cool. I love it.
Thank you. No, I think what I would add is that when quitting my perfectly stable job to start a nonprofit and try to make the world better, it was like very clear to me that it was not sufficient to just have a medical practice, and try to really to do anything for the neurodivergent community. We have to do everything. It's not just medical care, it's social isolation, it's employment, it's accessing education, it's everything. So we do all of that, and really bringing people together as a community village to do the hard work of unlearning and unpacking all the internalized ableism and all the things, do that together, and learn and heal together.
Well, and I think when you move outside a sort of acute medical model, which is really important and has its place for acute medical issues, then social connection becomes part of healthcare, right? Like you're not doing healthcare, you're doing holistic delivery of healthcare.
Absolutely. I think that, this arbitrary distinction between healthcare and the rest of life never made any sense to me. It's the idea that, and even when I practiced in traditional primary care setting, I was spending all of my time helping people problem solve life outside the exam room. People are not going to achieve holistic health if they are socially isolated, if they can't access education, access employment. It's all part of health.
And I think that's a really nice segue into what we're going to be talking about today, because we're talking about why differences in people's sensory integration process are seen as from such a deficit lens. And, I do think that one of the reasons for that is this siloed mentality that we have. It dominates Western culture, and it's really sort of endemic. It's putting its fingers around the world thanks to, you know, awful things like colonialism and you know, we could talk about capitalism and all sorts of things, but you know, because of this siloed mentality where, you know, you were talking about medicine is here and social is here and this is here and this is here, we've also got normal, almost as if it's a unitary thing, right? A homogenous identity, right? Like this idea that there's one right way to be human, which is nicely marketable, guilts us into spending money, all of those different things, and actually tremendously harmful to communities finding each other, finding themselves, you know. And so anything that's different has become aberrant, has become problematic. And so I think that that is a huge source of the challenges we have with the stigma of experiencing the world differently. What do you think when you hear me go big like that?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to go big. You have to zoom way out and, you know, and recognize that everything's connected to everything. I mean, you think about all of the oppressive systems where there's power over other humans, they're all related, they're all one thing. And that message of there is one right way to be a person, that's all part of it. That ableist message, you know, it starts in early development and, you know, in infancy, you know, and I'm trained in a traditional medical model where I was literally taught there is one right way to develop. It is this linear progression, and it's like, this is normal. And like the fear instilled in the parents when this is not seen, like it's just wrong. It's complete mythical nonsense. And that is the dominant narrative. And when you think about that message of that there is one right way to be a person and you're not it, think about the impact on the development of self when you're getting these messages explicitly or implicitly that there's one right way to be and you're not it. Like, how could that not traumatize invariably a human being?
Yes, and that's I mean, you know, that's like a huge soapbox for me, that the impact over the lifespan for individuals who constantly hear messages that are that they need to be fixed, that they're weird. You know, why are we still like letting kids choose teams off the benches, last on the bench, right? You know, all of these different things. And then on top of that, this message of like, I was imagining as you were talking the because you're worth it face, right? Like there's a face that we should all aspire to. And it's actually got no expression. And I mean, what is happening to these actresses that we, you know, are aging alongside, where, you know, their faces aren't moving? I don't know if anyone else has been watching Picard, but it's been lovely seeing the cast reunion, and so much Botox apparently in the future still. And, you know, so we get this message of like what we should aspire to be, what's not good enough. And there's very little celebration of diversity. So you know, and I think, and it absolutely starts very, very young. I mean, the messages, I guess I'm thinking as well about, you're talking about the messages that our infants get, but don't the parents get those messages? I remember being deeply offended with the ultrasound of my oldest, that he was everything was typical. Everything was average, right? Which is good news, apparently. But I guess my autistic brain went, how dare you? I will not be having an average child. But we use that language, and then, that you want your child to be inside the bell curve. That starts immediately, actually. I never really made that connection, I don't think.
Yeah, it's when I think about stigma, the healthcare system perpetuates the stigma of the autism narrative.
Oh,
I think, and I think that even when, for example, the way that commonly a diagnosis is made, it's gross. It's this really pathologized, deficit-based lens through which even many evaluations are conducted. I remember. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I'm agreeing with you. We get taught how to break the news, don't we, as healthcare professionals? Keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. My organization has a free program every week called Brain Club on Tuesday evenings. And last week we had a community panel of late identified autistic adults who learned they were autistic 20s through 60s, telling their story. It was pretty powerful. And it was incredible how people shared the process of learning that they're autistic. And one person on the panel talked about how when her child was diagnosed, the doctor handed them a box of tissues. Gross. Anyway, when I make a diagnosis, we high five afterwards, because thank goodness we have learned. What great news. We have acquired a lens to understand a brain and a nervous system.
Oh, and we should probably point to some resources that we like as we have this conversation. And that just made me think of what's it called? The book that's just come out of Australia. I'm going to find it.
Yeah, I'm going to grab it.
I literally
have a visual.
Oh, I love that one as well.
Yeah.
That wasn't the one I was thinking of, but matchy. I was thinking of The Brain Forest. So it's a children's.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really lovely, and it just really normalizes this conversation around diversity and the benefits of understanding how different brains experience the world. And what, of course, I want the conversation to go to, and how that benefits everyone else, right? So The Brain Forest is a really nice book about this, and gosh, I wish every classroom had. Gosh, how many books do you think the average classroom has in the classroom, not in the library? It's not that many in some classrooms, but I guess if we're someone put together a statistic where they try to add up all of the different neurodivergent populations to try and estimate how many people are outside the bell curve, right? How many, so we've got our autistic population, and then we've got our ADHDers. We might have non-verbal learning differences, if that's the same or different, those are matters of opinion. There's so many different things. Then we've got differences in emotional regulation, mood, traditionally called mood disorders, those sorts of things. I wonder if we could come up with that number, and then that is the percentage of books that should be representative in the classroom too, right? Wouldn't that be cool? And then we could have A Day Without Words, which is another great book. I think I said it right, by Tiffany Hammond. And as they get older, A Kind of Spark, which is such a great book. Have you read it yet?
I have not.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna love it. It's
amazing.
It's fiction. Now I have it in here, but I'm not going to spend too long looking for it. It's by Elle McNichol, and it's just been made into a TV series. And they actually consulted me at the front end of the series, and they were like, we're doing this, right? Or we're not doing it. It's really cool. So there's all these resources now that we could be proactively incorporating into daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, inclusion starts in preschool. And so I think that, right
Or
from the ground up.
or in the maternity ward.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. That was a misstatement on my part. And I think that, the narrative of we all have different brains. We all have different brains that learn, think, and or communicate differently. And that we all exist on a continuum. I think that message has to start from the very, very beginning. And I think that's part of destigmatizing sensory processing differences.
Yeah, I've just been asked to list that resource again, and I think you mean a kind of spark. Normally, I would give you the Amazon Smile link, but they don't do that anymore. So I'm just going to give you a straight up link. Let's see, a kind of spark. I don't know why I'm getting the Chinese edition coming up, but it's called A Kind of Spark. It's by Elle McNichol. And it's been made into a TV series, which I haven't been able to actually watch yet, but has gone down very well in the UK. Yeah, and if anyone from the UK is watching, one of the coolest things I think happened recently was that Elle McNichol, who I believe lives in Scotland, got a Blue Peter badge, which was very cool. So Blue Peter is this stalwart show for British children. We all grow up on Blue Peter, and it's kind of like a Good Morning America, but for kids in the afternoon after school. And so they talk about current events, and they get guests on, and they do like a little bit of cooking or a little bit of craft and stuff like that. But if you get a Blue Peter badge, that's it. That you're done. That's the pinnacle. And so Elle McNichol got a Blue Peter badge, which for me was very, very cool to have her come on. She's such an articulate speaker about her own neurodivergent lived experience and the need for others to just chill out about it. So it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. Yeah, and I think one of the things I've been struggling with recently, and it's because my children are teenagers now, and they're all divergent in one way or another. My kiddos. My oldest is ADHD, autistic, and big systems thinker. Really surprise you to know. And high school's awful, isn't it?
It's so awful.
And like, what is it that we do culturally that makes high school feel like the Lord of the Flies? Why is it socially this sink or swim sort of fear-based social hierarchy? I don't know, I just feel like we're not really, until we ask those big questions, I don't know that we can talk about destigmatizing.
Right. I think that, this is all connected, right? Where I think that many people grow up perceiving that narrative, that paradigm of like, there's one right way and you're not it. So for safety, you must mask, you must show up in a certain way for your own safety. And
Yeah.
that superficially may keep you safe in the short term, but it is, I think, contributing to the brain body disconnect that so many people experience, and a habitual response where you're having like cortical override of the limbic system when you feel unsafe. And so if you're in a social situation as a kid, and you the only experiences you're having are those, we have so many people, right, who as adults have never had the experience of feeling safe and connected in relationship. And I think the sink or swim, Lord of the Flies high school thing,
Yeah.
that's all part of that.
I'm sort of thinking out loud as we talk, and we knew this would happen, didn't we? You and I, we knew this would happen, but and that, apparently that's why they put us together for this. But I'm thinking about I'm wondering if all of our children have this experience of threat because of the social structures that we throw them into. And then there's this threat of perhaps being othered or excluded. And okay, forgive me if this comes out awfully, but do those with neuro majority brains get the need to mask and sort of just weave that in to how they go about the world? Whereas, the more autistic brain, I think, go initially at least, sort of, I've met so many people who sort of go, no, I won't be pretending to be like that until it's sort of past the point of no return. And then I've made myself a target, or I'm already on the outside. I don't know. I'm just wondering, like, I'm a late diagnosed autistic myself. And, when you get that late diagnosis and then you just go back over your whole life, moment by moment. And I remember one of my best friends in elementary school, and we spent so much time together. When we went, there's only elementary school and high school where we were. So then when we went to high school, it became more and more apparent how different she was, until one day when she really sort of objected to something that was a social justice issue. And she objected by saying, I object, or no, she went, objection, and explained it. And everyone in the classroom thought this was hilarious. And I remember thinking, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Like watching her, like watching a slow motion car accident or something, like, don't do it, don't do it. Oh, you did it. And then I dumped her like a hot coal. And I tried really hard to fit in more with the kids who didn't have that brain, even though mine aligned more with hers. And I say that with such deep shame, actually. And, what was it that caused me to try and survive at all costs in this social hierarchy to the extent of hurting someone I deeply cared about?
Yes, and that didn't come from your cortex. You didn't sit and weigh the pros and cons of dumping your friend. You had a limbic, automatic, involuntary response. It is not your fault. Little elementary school you was driven to survive. That's how limbic systems work, right? So I appreciate you sharing this experience and making yourself vulnerable by telling the story. And I've had a million stories like that where I really look back and I'm like, how did I treat another human that way? Oh yeah, limbic system. That's how they work. Yeah. So it's and that's the stigmatized narrative. And I also think that, a lot of there's when we think about neurodivergent children have at least one neurodivergent parent, many of whom don't know, that was me, right? So I didn't know. And over time, there's you see the things that most remind you of your childhood shame. And you most want those, you want to protect your kid from that thing. And that's, I think, one of the driving factors for ableism is all the internalized ableism that people have.
So one of the reasons maybe that ableism gets such purchase in us as we grow and develop our sense of self is because it's really another word for a form of shame.
All roads lead to shame. I think you're absolutely right.
So does that mean we need Brene Brown to come on and talk to us?
I think so. So at Brain Club Yeah, we did a book chat on, I thought it was just me, but it isn't, in the context of
Yeah.
internalized ableism. And like, people came out and really like deeply engaged with that discussion.
Yeah.
Because I think the shame is real. And so, Brene Brown would say that the first thing you do is you name your shame, because almost always someone else will say me too. And then that's, then you can
Wow.
zoom out and think about all the factors that led to this and all this. But like, it first comes from the safety of a relationship and connection of like, you're not alone, you're not isolated, you're not the only one, because you're not.
Okay, so if we're talking about destigmatizing, then I think some key things that we're talking about here is understanding the limbic system. Ableism is covert shame.
Yes.
That's weaponized by industries who benefit from it financially. So
Yes.
so then is it like I'm thinking about, my husband's a science teacher. I didn't know that when we first were together that he was going to choose to be a teacher. It took me a minute to get over it, but we're okay now, just messing. But he used to teach a class called The Theory of Knowledge, and it was so cool. And it was about there was a lot of it about being critical thinkers, questioning where you got your information from. I'm thinking about a theory of knowledge kind of approach to ableism. And like, yeah, I think we're onto something. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that, how I might integrate, the kind of predictability of the limbic system with all this might be that, for so many people with hypersensitive neuroception or threat detection, it's the knowledge, it's just not safe if it's not acquired autonomously. Autonomy is an access need for many. And I think that, the pursuit of knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge, the source, like it has to feel safe in order to be accessed. And I think that whether we're thinking about like book knowledge or like social knowledge, I think we can tell. I think we can tell by vibe whether an environment is safe or not. Actually, I once had a conversation with an 8-year-old PDAer who was really focused on that people could read their mind. And I had this epiphany of like, oh, I remember being an 8-year-old thinking that not only could people read my minds, but I could read their minds. And really it was that when you're hypersensitive to energy,
Yeah.
You can read vibe. It's not the same as reading mind, but it feels like it. And so like naming that conceptually for that sweet little love was really important, I think. And so right after that, I named it for my then 4-year-old. Like we've been talking about, like, my child's growing up in a neurodiversity affirming household. We've been talking about brains since she's 2. She actually thinks that we all have different brains that do things differently.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know that like kids grow up not getting that message. It's all she's ever known.
Same with my kiddos, talking about brains. And I remember the day I realized I used to have to walk them to school when we lived in Hong Kong. So we'd walk to the ferry and then we'd walk to the bus. And I'd use that opportunity to reflect on maybe what we were learning at the moment, right? Like, to be kind to our sibling or whatever. And I remember realizing one day, because he did it very clumsily, but he'd been doing this for weeks, that my son, who's got an autism diagnosis now, but he was like, I was trying to like sideways bring up something that we needed to talk about. And he went, tell me about the amygdala again. And I was like, oh, you you've been doing that to get out of these conversations, haven't you? The brain.
That's amazing.
I just remember being like, oh, you got me. But hey, somebody wants, can you speak more to autonomy as an access need?
I can.
I knew it.
Yeah, so I think that when, I mean, you know, we can categorize if we want to, but I think maybe I'll just say that I started thinking about this in the context of those with a PDA profile of autism.
So first of all, let's define.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And originally pathological demand avoidance is what it stood for. There's some, guess what, there's some controversy around the topic. Some people think PDA is not part of the autism profile. Other people think it only really exists inside autism for some people. And, you know, remembering again that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And what that means is with autism, but what that means is there is incredible variety in autistic populations. So definitely, you know, not every autistic person would identify with PDA, but some do. And there's a reframe of it at the moment as a pervasive drive for autonomy instead of this other deficit lens. And it fits really nicely because what we hypothesize is happening is when you're confronted with a demand, really of any kind, that the nervous system actually has a response that is body-based and involuntary to that demand, to that perceived demand. And so when that sort of thing happens, our nervous systems become sensitized to the trigger. And so the more we're confronted with demands, which is one approach, right? I will coerce you into compliance, but actually the nervous system gets sensitized to that stressor and has bigger reactions or takes longer to recover, and we have this negative spiral. So that was my PDA in a nutshell explanation.
That was way more articulate than I would have done. So thank you, thank you for the context. You know, when I first learned about PDA, because again that term is not as commonly used in the United States as compared to the UK, Australia. When I first learned about this in the context of my then 3-year-old, you know, I was like, oh yeah, this. And I really conceptualized it, and you know, I learned a lot by, you know, reading and watching things created by PDA autistic adults, and I really conceptualized this for myself as like, this is a limbic response. This is neuroception related demand avoidance, whether this be, you know, external or internal. And so that helped me as a parent to be able to frame of like, oh, my sweet little love is having a limbic response to the way I've asked that question, or the way, you know, just even being asked a question at all is threat. She doesn't get to pick. It just is. Anyway, the more I learned, I realized, oh, yeah, I'm a PDAer, and I'm more of an internalized dysregulated person a lot of the time. I mean, I definitely flip my lid externally on the regular, but in day-to-day life, I am more of an internalized, you know, flood kind of chaos internally, as opposed to like throwing chairs or something. Anyway, but I say this because I think that when we go back to autonomy as an access need, one of the reasons that maybe sidebar, like many late identified adults, I got my autism diagnosis in the context of autistic burnout. And I think that when we think about autistic burnout as the accumulation of physical and cognitive exhaustion that results in, loss of tolerance for like everything in the world, and a loss of skills. I lost the ability to mask. Even though masking is involuntary for many people, it still involves some degree of executive functioning, like impulse control, for example. And so I lost the ability to do that. And one of the reasons that that happened was I lost my autonomy. I had a working situation. This was in early COVID. I lost autonomy over my own safety. I was working in the hospital, taking care of patients with COVID. I was on call all the time. I didn't get to sleep enough. And then all the things that piled up, there's lots of people who have very similar stories. And it's that, I need autonomy over the things that matter, or I don't feel safe in this world. And coping with, with threat of any kind for many people is going to, you could think about it even as draining a battery. You're going to, if you're not safe, you can't do anything else.
You have made me think about 5 million things, but I want to go back and ask you, with your internalized PDA experiences, I want to also go back and talk about neuroception and autistic burnout and masking, but when you talked about your internalized PDA experiences, so you're saying you're holding all of this in, all of it in, all of it in, all of it in, before burnout, before it gets to that point. How does that deplete you? How does it manifest? Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah. I mean, all right, let's think about this. So I think how it manifests is exceptional fatigue. The amount of cognitive effort required to like stuff it all day long for years it's exhausting. I think now that I have a lens, because I say this from really a place of privilege. It is a privilege to have autonomy over my working conditions. It is a privilege that I have the kind of job that I can bill health insurance for. So like I can create all kinds of systems that are like not participating in the oppressive power systems that make me feel unsafe. I can opt out of a lot of things because I have the privilege of having the kind of job that can use the system to pay for the health of the people. I want to name that really explicitly because not everyone can do that. And so when people, I mean, actually, back up to me, I have autonomy over my working conditions most of the day. And I still interface with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is often not safe. So for example, if I'm doing a training with a group of people who see me and people who share my neurotype through a deficit-based lens, I can feel that. I can feel that deeply, and it hurts me. I can feel that my heart rate, for example, it'll shoot up to like 150 just sitting here because I'm like interacting with people who would rather my neurotype not exist. Like I can feel that. So when I say internalized dysregulation, I really can't really function very well after I have interactions like that. I have to shut all the lights off, and I can't really. Yeah, go ahead.
You said, what did you say about fatigue?
It's so much fatigue that I can't really do anything else.
Yeah.
Like I can't really perform. Like my brain just is not able to connect the dots and complete the tasks.
So like a regular pushing yourself past a normal amount of energy expenditure. And I use the word normal there really as in, for you, the healthy amount.
That's right.
But because of things, because of reasons, you go beyond that. regularly, because of 40-hour work weeks, because of, and then we get to this point of potential burnout, which I think, I can't wait for more research on burnout. It's not well enough researched phenomenon. And in the research, it's really only talked about in the context of adulthood. And, I'm really interested in burnout in pediatrics as well, because I think we see that a lot.
We totally see that a lot. I mean, I think I see it every day in my medical practice.
Yeah.
So, I think that, when even the term developmental regression, maybe we're actually seeing burnout in toddlers. Maybe this is really, it's a loss of skills in the context of depletion. I would say that, in my medical practice, often we will see kids that, they're so dysregulated, either externalized, you can tell really obviously that they're dysregulated, or not. They're withdrawn, they spend all their time in their room, they don't come out. And, maybe there's environmental situations where they don't have autonomy. Maybe they're at school where they are, required to mask all day long, and that they've drained their battery such that they don't have anything left.
Yeah. And then, gosh, there's so much to think about, in the context of, we're not just talking about autism here. And so there's a couple of things I want to call out. So in the context of where people don't necessarily meet the criteria for autism, but have differences in the sensory integration process, and they identify with the diagnostic category, or whatever you want to call it, SPD, sensory processing disorder, or sensory integration dysfunction. There also, however, is this sort of expectation for them to behave in socially appropriate ways. Socially appropriate being a phrase that's highly damaging and problematic, and a bit of a myth, a bit of a misnomer. What is socially appropriate, right? Like, we've decided that we can teach social skills with a set of concrete rules as a culture, and none of us follow those social skills, neuromajority or not, when we're out in spaces, because everyone invites nuance and differentiation. There's endless variety in all of our social relationships, and yet we put this expectation of socially appropriate behavior on our children, particularly, and it's a higher expectation than we put on many adult learners and many adults in the workplace. And so we've got this SPD thing as well, that we want to recognize as a neurodivergent experience. And I want to sort of call out that in the past, this differentiation between SPD and autism, for example, has also been a bit problematic, because it's been seen as SPD isn't quite as much bad news as autism. And again, we've got this sort of siloed, I don't even know what we've got. We've got this safety-driven need to fit in.
Yeah, and I think that when we think about even, the DSM-5 criteria for autism, in my view, are autistic stress behaviors.
Right. Yeah.
And so when we think about, the idea that there would be these really big separate distinctions between various neurodivergencies, it just makes no sense. It also doesn't tell you anything about that nervous system. And to just, it's a set of descriptions of what people look like with externalized dysregulation.
So a DSM diagnosis doesn't tell you anything about that person's nervous system. I love that. And yeah, I would agree. I think, I mean, the practitioner that diagnosed me, the psychologist, said one of the reasons that it wasn't identified when I was younger, well, actually, he was talking more about in my, since sort of my late teens. I left home very, very early. And he said it wasn't caught because you were a happy autistic. Which I
Fascinating.
thought, right? And you know, I talk about the DSM diagnostic criteria as distress behaviors, right? Autistic distress behaviors, which is basically exactly the same thing that you said. And again, like I come back to this idea of this covert shame, and the DSM, you know, was never meant to become the document that it is today. It was meant originally, Bessel van der Kolk says, and I can't see it, you can see me trying to look for it so that I don't misquote anyone, but Bessel van der Kolk says something about this in The Body Keeps the Score, and he says, it was really meant as a sort of more of a tool of validation for people to go, you know, who particularly, I think, originally were struggling with their mental health and needed someone to say, yeah, there's something going on. It's body-based, it's brain-based, it's depression, and this is what that means, and this is how we can help you. And it was supposed to be this tool for validation and help, and it was never supposed to be used as a tool to determine eligibility for services.
The gatekeeping. It's a gatekeeping set of
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's this study, Zerbo et al. From 2015, surveying primary care physicians, and found that less than 10% of PCPs would suspect autism if the patient volunteered information, showed interest in people, discusses emotions, and can see the whole picture. Seeing the whole picture is one of my biggest strengths, as it is for many autistic people. And so, like, just that it's a story of stereotypes. So primary care clinicians are generally trained in stereotypes. Then you go out to training and you see the stereotypes, so you match the pattern you were trained in. So then you're out in practice and you still only see those stereotypes. You only refer on if you're not somebody who does, I mean, like the fact that this is even something that, you know, there's like 260 something diagnoses in the DSM. Why do we make such a big deal about this one and not all of the other things in the DSM? The stigma is driven through all of these like subtle yet profound things that are about gatekeeping.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, there's this innate, again, we come back to this sort of innate drive, the gatekeeping, the drive to gatekeep. And my brain's gone somewhere. I'm starting to think about the work of with this like whole, you've been talking about gatekeeping, and then you talked about autistic communities on the periphery a bit, and you talked about yourself interfacing. You made I don't know why. So my brain, I really love this. She's officially an American geographer. She's called Ruth Wilson Gilmore. Absolutely phenomenal brain and thinker. And the professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences at City University. Ruth, one of the things Ruth Wilson Gilmore has done is looked at the prison pipelines through a social justice geographical lens. And she talks about prisons on the periphery, on the outskirts. And then, because she's got this geography perspective, how boundaries and edges are actually also interfaces. And my brain's sort of going to this idea of, you know, how each, there's slight differences culturally across the world in how we exclude or include neurodivergent community members. But there's a lot of putting them on the edge and the outskirts. And then, you know, if we think about that, and then this gatekeeping is the act of putting someone on the outside, right? Bear with me, I think I'm going somewhere. So you've got this act, this gatekeeping act of keeping people on the outside. That's a response perhaps to our internalized ableism and our covert shame and our drive to be different. No, our drive to be the same. Okay, and then, so then, I don't know, like I come back to, again, sort of unlearning so much that's become embedded in our culture as part of like industrialization and things like that. I feel like what we're doing when we're looking at interpersonal neurobiology nowadays, I again and again feel like we're coming back to indigenous ways of knowing. Does that track?
That does track. And I think that within, I mean, so I just have 50,000 thoughts that came from your 50,000 thoughts.
I know, and I will get more coherent, I promise. I won't.
No, but you don't have to get more coherent because all the thoughts are connected to all the thoughts. Is how it works. Anyway, I would say that, you know, I should have like written down my thoughts to get them out of my head and organize them. But anyway, I would say that, oh, nice. Oh, and you have Post-it notes. That's amazing. Anyway, so because you can move them around. Anyway,
yeah.
But I would say that we know that people who are, you know, anyone other than a cis male are less likely to get identified. We know that people of color are less likely to be identified as autistic. We have all these like we have these stats that say that there's a stereotype, and when you're not it, you don't. The gate is kept from you. So there's that. I think that when we also think about just marginalization on the whole, when we think about the, you know, the intersectionality of all of the different ways in which people are othered, you know, neurodivergent people who are marginalized for all the other aspects of their identity. I mean, like just the impact of trauma is just exponential. I think that this is also for me, I think that going back to the silos of even like these kind of arbitrary distinctions between all of these diagnoses, it actually prevents community and connection, I think.
Right. That's
what we learned last week and you know, I didn't learn it last week. What we saw last week at our brain club with our community panel that identified autistic people, what they talked about is that one of the many important things that happened since their diagnosis was that they had a lens not only to understand, you know, I think Virginia, when you went back and you said, you know, you look back over the story of your life to re-examine, these people were also describing that they had a lens to find community of other people who have endured all these decades of internalized ableism, and now you find each other, and through community you can do the work of unlearning together.
Yes to all of that. And like that community piece to me is kind of everything, because I think through the siloed mentality of what I would call colonial or Western thinking, we're clearly in jeopardy. Like, you know, there is something up. And I'll get to that comment in a second, but you know, I think the silos, and I think, you know, the silos and the gatekeeping, are they the same thing? Very, very similar, right? The internalized shame around being different, that to me is like, if I go back to industrialization and how I think that was part of these challenges is, if everything's on a conveyor belt, then you need convenient humans to fit into the conveyor belt boxes, right? And so for me, it keeps coming back to community, which is one of the things I love so much about your model, right? Like that if we could have community-driven healthcare and education and things like that, if we could, let me use a really problematic word, and then I'll backtrack and explain why maybe it shouldn't be as triggering as it is, right? But what we've got is these systemic issues that are perpetuating and baking in stigma, the deficit lens, and individualism above all else. And because we don't have community, we are not individuating as our sense of self, right? Like I don't get a sense that my sense of self is valuable because it's different. And so then we come to this controversial word, abolition. And so that controversial word, abolition, really means to build more than it means to take apart, right? That's where I'm going with this, right? And so that we come back to this need to build. So if we're going to address stigma, we have to build, we have to connect, we need community, we need to come back to the wisdom of the body, these indigenous ways of knowing, we need to connect with the land. Gosh, I know I sound like a comedian's material for a comedian about millennials or something, but like it just, for me, like if we're destigmatizing, that's where we're going. I guess I'm curious what that sparks in you, and then I have another thought I want to just throw in.
No, I think I think you're absolutely right. I think that one of the, I mean, there's so many things, but if I was going to pick one thing to say about that, I would say that one of the things that we've found at All Brains Belong through this community health village model is that we've actually been able to take on the challenges of the physical health conditions that many, if not most, autistic adults struggle with. And so, for example, many autistic adults are struggling with neuroimmune conditions, dysautonomia, mast cell dysfunction, connective tissue differences related to hypermobility, these things, long COVID, these things are all connected. They're all one thing. And in many ways, one might say that a hypersensitive neuroception it's like the canary in the coal mine of like this, meaning the environment, this is not working. This is not safe, like the alarm of like unsafe, like, yeah. So we have a lot of strategies that we've learned in our community village model. And until we are really looking at the mismatch of the environment to the access needs of the individual, I think it's the alarm is going to keep sounding. So
right, and then like, and again, like that feels to me like sort of addressing things as they are. We have to employ the social model of disability. But if we could build what we want, it would look really, really different, I think.
Well, it would use universal design principles.
Right.
If we name the thing that we all have different brains, we would build a future where all the things are offered in multiple different ways.
So universal design then being another key principle of how to do this sort of destigmatizing work.
Yeah, and if I could give an example of that, is that in our medical practice, We have a menu. The menu has all different things on it. You choose your lighting, you choose your furniture, you choose where you wait, you choose like whatever communication, executive functioning, sensory support you might want. We don't wait for you to disclose a disability. We offer this to everybody because that's how it's supposed to work. And I mean, it's anyway, so it's not rocket science. It's also free. It's literally free to just shift your paradigm that you don't have any defaults because there's not a default brain.
Shift your paradigm so that you don't have any defaults, because normal is just a setting on the washing machine. Is my favorite.
That expression, yes.
Yeah. I'm thinking, first of all, I think maybe could you just like do what is neuroception in a nutshell?
I think about it as threat detection.
Okay. So like a nervous system level threat detection.
Yeah. Like an automatic, not something you think about. It's like, I think about how all of us are subconsciously monitoring the environment, safe, not safe. And whether it's the way you're wired at birth, and or the accumulated response of trauma, both macro and micro trauma, to be, let's say, for example, if I am trauma physiology, I enter a space, I'm on guard, I'm hypervigilant, I am more likely to detect threat than if my nervous system has a threshold that's like down here, not up here for threat.
And how, for me, how do we detect threat? Through sensation, right? You've got that, and then we come that full circle back to sensory integration and processing. And actually, I don't know if I might have read this to you already, Mel, but one of my favorite parts of this book is a challenge that they extend to the sensory integration professionals. Much of the terminology used to talk about autistic sensory processing comes from the stance of an ableist and biased perspective of neurotypical sensory processing being the gold standard, and anything diverging from this as being disordered. Terms such as over or under responsive are not neuroaffirmative and are not based on some objective measure of reality and correct response, but again are judged against what is typical for neurotypicals. It makes little sense to say autistic people are over responsive to auditory information when they can hear sounds that do exist, but that neurotypicals cannot hear. The Adult Autism Assessment Handbook, it's brand new, it's really, really good. And I think that challenge is really interesting. And I do think that they overlook our motor apraxic community a little with that comment. So, I want to really be clear that so developmental motor apraxia, it's not an official term in the sensory integration community, not yet anyway. What we do know is that there are lots of ways that dyspraxia can manifest, and dyspraxia is something Dr. Houser referred to a second ago, right at the beginning actually, but it is difficulty producing a response action to something going on internally or externally, and that difficulty can be in multiple ways. Go ahead.
Can we talk about that? So I can only speak for myself, but I, as an individual, really struggle with that.
Yeah.
I think that where I have grown is to say, yeah, this is part of who I am. I'm really proud of being autistic. I find that when I struggle from a, whether it's related to my ideomotor dyspraxia or even just like, my ideational dyspraxia where, I'm meandering and my ideas are all over the place. And all that, like this consumes like a lot of my cognitive load. And maybe I do well when I can say, well, of course this was hard. Or of course I didn't use my strategy. And like, I maybe I have improved in terms of like not giving myself as much of a hard time as I have for the past 40 years, since I knew this was a thing. But like, it's not a thing. I mean, I guess I incorporate my self-awareness of my dyspraxia as connected to the larger whole of how I'm wired. Like being autistic is who I am, and it is why that is why I'm able to do everything good in the world that I'm able to do. And I would say that I like have to work harder to identify like there's something positive about this motor coordination struggle that I'm having. And I would say that the thing that is really helpful is I understand task analysis. I'm not an occupational therapist. I have no training in task analysis, but I understand task analysis, and I'm able to like help people with that.
Yeah, so here's my take on, we'll come back to motor apraxia in a second, but you know, I think, and the reason I want to spend some time on that is because I think I want to be very clear that there are aspects of the autistic experience and the neurodivergent experience that really do align with disability experience. Do they have to for every neurodivergent person? No. Some of that is about this goodness of fit in the environment. And then for other people, there is a disability experience that it is wrong to dismiss. And we'll come back to that in a second, but this dyspraxia piece, so the sensory integration process is not just about how responsive a person is to the world. Do you have heightened responsivity or muted responsivity? And we think that happens at a really neural level. It's also about the body's ability to organize around the sensations that we are experiencing all the time. So posture and postural development is one aspect of how the body organizes itself against gravity to be able to organize and stabilize your eyes so they don't roll around like the eyes of one of those creepy dolls, to be able to breathe and access your diaphragm and your pelvic floor. You sort of have to win this fight against gravity, and then all sorts of other things have to come online. Praxis is another way we organize ourselves in response to these sensations so that we can produce response actions on our own terms effectively and experience bodily mastery and motor mastery. I think that this is where my brain is right now. I think that for many neurodivergent individuals, and I include those who identify as SPD, ADHD, autism, where there's this difference in the sensory integration process, what we're failing to do is provide the just right childhood developmental experiences that will bring posture online and praxis online. Now, that's not to say I could have been an Olympic dancer if someone had given me the just right experiences, but by throwing me in to mainstream physical education and gross motor and all of those things, where the emphasis is on the academic over bodily mastery, I think that that does a disservice to our neurodivergent community members. It's not personalized at all. And so the delay or the deficit comes from this failure culturally and from a health perspective and education perspective to provide the just right experience that is organizing for that child's brain and body. And so, yeah.
It comes back to shame. So I have the lived experience of growing up as an unrecognized dyspraxic child, of feeling like, I mean, I remember like the field day phenomenon. Everybody shows up, you play these gross motor games, and like it was my worst nightmare. I mean, every year it was just like, this is the place where I feel least competent. And so anyway, I think that that's really common amongst peoples who have this experience of like, there's a right way to move and coordinate and be, and I'm not it. So I'm either going to feel really badly about myself, or I'm going, as part of my niche construction, I'm actually going to avoid all the things that are hard. And I'm going to have this really narrow scope of what I do. And as long as I do the things that I am competent at, I'll be just fine. And then something new comes along, and it all rushes back. And I think that experience of having the gap between what you intend and what you're able to carry out with your own body, when that gap is, that gap is everything.
Everything. But bodily sense of self starts with sense of bodily self, and motor mastery precedes self-determination in the cognitive, abstract, emotional realm for most people, right? But what we do is we say, here's how we provide physical education, and if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. And so you got this sense of incompetency. You did not experience efficacy in field day, sports day. Yeah, it was the worst. I was quite good at running in a very small school, so they kept putting me on the cross country team, which was awful. But so I self-sabotaged and basically, yeah, you don't need to know what I did, but it wasn't good. But the physical education that we have is pretty one size fits all. And if we do provide extra support, it works for the kids who don't need it. The kids who need it, we need to really flip the priorities in early childhood and come back to, Piaget actually said this, and Jean Ayres, of course, said this, but like these are the sensory motor years. And we really want, what I'd really love is for our neurodivergent children to be experiencing motor mastery as the priority in early childhood. And so, the child who's already struggling with posture, and then we put them in the car seat forever, or, we actually rethink and redesign their experiences so that they can, knock over the tower and then develop something more sophisticated as they increasingly experience, again, what I'm calling motor mastery to the, ad nauseum. But, someone asked if there was a book. I wouldn't say there's a book. I think the thing is, what we need is all the books, and also to write a book. But there's a book, we need the book on hypermobility, we need the book on this, we need the book on this, we need the book on this, so that we can be providing the just right educational experiences.
I would say there's also, I think that it's really important that people have self-awareness. So, for example, my 6-year-old, who is very dyspraxic, when I see her flip her lid, when sometimes she's not able to do the thing that she was able to do earlier today when she had more dopamine, or the thing she was able to do yesterday, or the thing she was able to do when she had a lot of motor repetitions, and then some period of time went by, and then she lost the motor plan, and she has to start all over, and she's like, what's happening? Anyway, I get it, because I live that all the time. Anyway, but so I talk about it all the time. One time we were driving in the car, and I'm like trying to parallel park, which, my brain turns all the motor plan steps into words. That's how I do anything. So, I have the same motor plan that I learned to parallel park, 20 years ago. And if it doesn't work, we're not parallel parking today. Anyway, so I'm trying to do the thing. I pull out. Oh, not right. It doesn't look quite right. I can't really tell, but I don't think it's right. Pull out, and like 12 times. And then finally I'm seeing like faces, which thanks. Thanks. It's lowering the shame. It's wonderful. Anyway, I finally, because child's in back seat, I'm like, we're not doing this today. Look, the sun's in my face. I'm hungry. I'm hot. Like, this is not happening. We're going to go find another parking spot. There we go. That's just part of how that's how our brains work. We also have the kind of brains that are noticing everything. And we have the kind of brain that can zoom way out and we can see the big picture and how everything's connected to everything. That's so awesome. And we're going to have to go park somewhere else. It's both.
Yes, 100% yes. And in fact, one of the first things that happened for me actually prior to when I was exploring a diagnosis of autism was that I was kinder to myself about where I parked, because I think it's called it's got a name, but I have no sense of direction. So, in former times we would have been like, oh, I wonder which part of the brain the sense of direction is. And I would have said, I probably don't have it. I have agenesis of the sense of direction part of the brain. But, and so one of the first things I did was become more compassionate about where I park. And just kinder to myself, right? Like if I need to park in the same place every single time, then I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to do that as a kindness to myself. And that self-compassion related to understanding how our brains process things is so key. And as I listen to you talk about how you learned to parallel park, and what I've been thinking recently about my sense of direction is, I'm wondering if you're a Gestalt motor processor.
Absolutely. I'm a Gestalt language processor, all of it. Yes.
Okay, yes. What does that mean?
So it's interesting how I think that it's interesting. I think that I want to hear what stood out to you, because I think that maybe how I spend my cognitive resources is maybe I do perceive the Gestalt and I have to use a lot of effort to break down the motor plan. Right. And it's the idea that if I weren't processing on the Gestalt level, I maybe wouldn't have to do that. Is that your thought?
Yeah, so this is very much my hypothesis at the moment. I'm really hoping to, we're doing some research at the moment, and there's so much more to do, but if a lot of people, so most people are probably both, right? Analytical motor processors and Gestalts. And so what you've got when you're an analytical motor processor, and if you've ever studied praxis, I'm going to use a little bit of jargon now. You're learning movements in small, discrete sort of units that we might call engrams. And these engrams are stored in your database. And you're also, you've also got, Dr. Schwartz is a good person to invite, I agree. So what you've got are these units that you can pull on, and then you've all very much sort of related to as well priors, and a prior is a previous sensory experience throughout your whole body and brain that you can pull on, so that we can start forward planning, predicting, all of those things. If you're more a Gestalt motor processor, here's the hypothetical piece. My theory right now is that you learn things in units or phrases or chunks, and so you learned to parallel park as that was a whole. It was a amalgam, not lots of small aspects of driving. And so when something shifts and you need to tweak the middle of the amalgam, you can't. But could we identify our Gestalt motor processors early, help them learn the chunk, and then help them break the chunk down so that in future they can problem solve, predict, and those sorts of things that immobilize us at the moment. That's my brain at the moment.
It's a game changer. Like, so for example, so yes, I feel very seen in your description of how I learn everything. So that, also I would say that I think it's been fairly evident to me that since my 6-year-old was like 18 months, that's all the things are holes, which is why that if anything gets derailed, she starts at the very beginning and has to do the whole thing again, right? So like, yeah, we've identified this very early, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And then we can come back nicely to this sort of developmental motor apraxia, which is a phrase that's really come out of the spelling community, people who use spelling to communicate. And so these are non-speaking or unreliably speaking individuals who, for the vast majority, the emphasis remained on learning to speak with their mouth until very, very late in life, when they were finally given some sort of alternative communication device that worked for them, and then demonstrated to everybody and became our teachers that they were cognitively at age appropriate level all along, in fact, a little advanced, very, very articulate thinkers, beautiful creativity, all of these things. But there's what the spelling community is calling this body-brain disconnect. And for me, so wonderful people to follow. There's Danny with Words is probably one of my favorite people to follow. Great teacher. Absolutely cannot diminish his disability experience. And, you know, we're really learning. So Danny Whitty, DannyWithWords.com. We're really learning, you know, about this. There is another presentation of dyspraxia that we need to figure out more about and learn more about. So I'm just going to throw up a couple of resources. By the way, this is the Laurie DeSautel's book. It's called Connections Over Compliance. It's very good. I do think she's about to publish another one, so maybe hold off. You know, and then if you want to think more about this motor apraxia piece, this is a very dense book by Liz Torres and Caroline Wyatt. It's called Autism, the Movement Sensing Perspective. It's absolutely fascinating, and you'll probably have to read it 300 times, just so you know. But you know, that's a huge piece for me in the sensory integration difference. I think, gosh, I just think we're finding out so much. There's a couple of things I want to add in our last few minutes from our conversation and come back to. You talked about masking requiring executive function, and that was a light bulb moment for me, because we talk about executive dysfunction as if it's a given, and yet what if it's just diverted executive function resources?
Right, you only have so much battery,
right?
And
we know that.
Right.
We know that executive function resources are finite, and that when we're fatigued, depleted, burnt out, that they go out the window. So what if, instead of executive dysfunction, what we have is all our EF resources going into socially appropriate behaviors, masking, camouflaging, processing all the extra data, all of those things. And so therefore, we cannot dedicate those resources to time management and long distance goal driven behaviors.
Sure. I think that is also consistent what we know about like the allocation of attention. And so it's not that you have an attention deficit, it's that your attention is on all the things or the one thing, right? So I think that makes sense, is that it relates to the allocation of executive functioning resources.
So we just solved all the world's problems. I've
Yeah, we
got
did.
yeah. So also, I want to summarize what some of the things we spoke to as solutions, although we're not promising any kind of magic results, just to be really clear. But before I go there, I want to come back to Ruth Gilmore Wilson, this amazing woman who looks at has looked at prisons and other issues and from a very beautiful systems lens. One of the things she talks about is organized abandonment of communities and the issues that causes. And so a really obvious example of that would be a small town that relies on one or two factories, and then those factories are no longer cost effective, and so they pull out of that area. And everyone talks about that being the issue, but really the local government let them pull out of that area. Investors let them pull out of that area. The federal government let them pull out of that area. And so there's this sort of organized abandonment that happens, and then this town is left to fend for themselves. They're at higher risk of radicalization and all sorts of things that I believe, are seeing happen in real time. And it may, as we were talking, and I was thinking about her work, and I was thinking about, periphery and gatekeeping and stuff, and I think what happens to our neurodivergent adults is organized abandonment, where there's no longer any services, and you kind of just have to put up with the specialist you get, even if they don't understand you. And
I think there's also a really deep impact of feeling abandoned, right? So to be felt like you're abandoned not only by people, like let's say individual healthcare providers, but being abandoned by an entire system. You don't matter to an entire system. I mean, that's just so, there are no words to describe how painful that is. And I think that what we're seeing in not just the autistic community, but the larger disability community is, I think that when we think about how autistic people or people with a wide range of disabilities are at increased risk of complications from COVID, I think that there's this feeling of being left behind, of feeling like your access does not matter. And especially in healthcare. Like, it's one thing to say, like, I have to choose between accessing this meaningful life participation and my health, but to choose between health and health care, it's just awful.
That's huge. That's huge. It's got huge implications. So we've got this sense that this organized abandonment, and this sense that, like, you don't matter, and you don't matter because you are not spending the money we're after, but your parents are. So there's got to be something we can do to flip this so that the community drives the resources that are provided rather than the industry driving it. And I think what we've said, and I think I've caught them, most of them, is coming back to community, and that meaning that diversity is celebrated, welcomed, and nourished. And then we would need to recreate and build new ways of doing school and healthcare.
Yeah, I think that for neuro-inclusive space, I think that you need to normalize diversity. I think that you need to set really clear ground rules around that there is no one right way to be. There's no one right way to play or communicate or, interact with one another. And that, if we're going to normalize diversity, we're going to normalize that there's going to be all these different types of access needs. We do have to have a way of navigating conflicting access needs, because if we all have different brains, we have all different access needs, and they are going to conflict, and having a plan for course correction is really important. But it's the alternative is not to say we're just not going to do it. We're going to just power over where the person with more power access needs matter more. We're not going to do that.
And you know, so we need this like theory of knowledge to become one of the required subjects at school, at university, right? Where we recognize before, when we start medical school, like it's very, very clearly drummed into the health professional that you are going to learn stereotypes at first as your way in, but you may not stay there. You cannot stay in that space. You have to move on to complexity, right? You know, that we can start questioning the way things are sold to us: information, history, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals. You know, we talk a lot about the scientific revolution and Kuhn's paradigm shifts, and that's something we need, right? And I think we're in. But there's also a really cool book, which I haven't finished yet, on moral revolutions. And I think we need both. I think we need a scientific revolution and a moral revolution. So that we can recognize when our shame is being weaponized, and we can call it out in schools early on, and prioritize autonomy and self-determination. Self-determination theory, I think, would be really helpful for anyone who's interested in this. And so that reflexivity of our young people, reflective thinking, reflective parenting, reflective healthcare, you know, it comes back to all of these pieces for me. So I think that's our summary. What do you think I missed?
One thing. When my 6-year-old has her access needs violated by the system, you know what she says? How dare you?
Yeah.
That's what she like, so if we can just shift, and we don't like want people running around saying, how dare you?
Yeah.
But like the concept is like, we should be looking at the fault is not on the person. It's about a mismatch of the environment and the expectations of the people in it.
So actually the individual taking back the locus of control.
To advocate, to say, these are my access needs, and they need to be met. Yeah.
Excellent. So all the world's problems solved. I love it.
Done. Check.
We could talk for hours. We're over time. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much. I do want to just again highlight some upcoming stuff that's happening. Let's see if I can do that. No. As fast as I can. So we've got oh no, apparently there, I'll do it like that. Okay. We really want to invite you all to come to Virtual Summit Autism. It's really cool. We think you'll love it. I've no idea if you can see the whole slide. If anyone could let me know, that would be great. It looks really weird on my screen. And we also want to invite you to our community talks, or to share these. Please share these. They're $10 for 3 days of access and 45 days afterwards access to the recordings. They're going to be amazing. They'll really empower parents. Let me see if this is better. There, is that better? That should be better. Thank you for the message. You know, so we really want to invite you to this, and it would really help us if you would share this with your networks. And finally, you know, STAR is a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, and we can only do what we do and webinars like this with your support. If you can give us $2 a month, that is a game changer for us. $5 as a thank you for this webinar, it also would be amazing. Or, you know, to say we want more. So small regular gifts are our favorite. We're very grateful for those. And again, you know, if you can't share, if you can't give, if you can't share, then just keep coming back And, you know, wait until there is something that suits your network and share that. Retweet, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. Very, very grateful for all of you helping us do what we do.